Hello, and yeah, welcome back. Today I'm bringing back the First Look series, and we're going to be taking a first look at an upcoming German premium Tier 9 heavy tank, the E77. And if suspicions slash rumours slash leaks are correct, we should be seeing this tank as part of the Halloween Waffentrager loot box, loot crates, whatever they're called, kind of shenanigans, hopefully in the next 2 to 3 weeks, with the event normally starting towards the mid-second, third week of September. So, as I said, it's a German heavy tank. So what are the general stereotypes for German heavy tanks? Relatively slow, decent turret armor, and decent alpha damage with a decent H-pull. This tank kind of follows that trend, but it's got a decent base DPM of 2.2k. Remember, all of these are base statistics, no field mods, no equipment, no crew skills, but 2.2k is pretty good. And when you do put a bond rammer, for example, you can get that up to just shy of 2.6k. That is pretty nice DPM for, especially for a German heavy tank. And aim time is okay, 2.4 seconds. Dispersion of 0.37 is lacking, but that's pretty stereotypical of German heavies, especially the slower German heavies, which this is because it does top out at 40 kilometers an hour. So you are going to want to be brawling with this tank close range, not sniping. And if you are having to shoot at mid to long range, don't expect the gun to be reliable. That's kind of the general stereotype with German tanks, and it applies to the E77. So, what else is interesting about this tank? Well, it has 8 degrees of gun depression. That's quite nice. And as we'll look at the armor model in a second, that does definitely elevate this tank's strengths in the fact that it has the stereotypical German turret armor. Frontally, 290mm, which for tier 9 is good. It's not best in class, but 290 is good. Normally, German turrets are quite flat, and we'll have a look at that and see what that actually does mean in terms of its effective armor. But 290 is good. 160 at the side is also pretty nice, so potentially we could maybe do some funky kind of angling, turret angling here, similar to how you do on the Mouse E100 to try and avoid it being such a flat surface. Hull armor is pretty weak. You know, this is kind of similar style of hull armor to tanks like the Löwe E75 TS, the German tier 8 premiums. But we do have a decent H-pull. 1.8k is kind of nice, and as you would probably run a hardening, you know, for example, if we just run the basic hardening, you are getting that up to 1950. If you were to run a bond hardening, you will pick this up to 2030, and that's obviously without field mods. With field mods, you should be able to get this thing up to just shy of 2.1, which is pretty nice. Definitely going to be able to make some decent trades with this tank, especially with that decent DPM and potentially decent armor. And then just for general view range, 390 is very base, and it has a pretty generic German crew with having a commander, gunner, driver, radioman, and loader, so a 5-man crew, which with the new crew skills basically means you're going to be able to kind of, you shouldn't be there shouldn't be too much stress on one crew member, sorry. So we like that. That's good. So what's this tank's armor model looking like? Well, let's have a look at it visually first. First of all, it looks quite cool. It almost looks as if you kind of combined, you know, it almost looks like you combined the KPZ, if anybody knows that, the tier 10 reward German heavy tank, which you got through like that auction craft system. With just a generic German heavy tank, you know, kind of a bit rounder, bit of an elongated turret. Yeah, it's a bit of a Frankenstein, but let's have a look at its live armor. So, this is frontally on flat armor against its own standard rams, which has 246mm of penetration, which is pretty alright. Turret, yeah. You're not going to be penning the turret. That's kind of, the entire turret is red against standard. It does have a reasonably sized cupola, but it's not giant. You know, that is, it's going to be hittable, but, you know, you can hide it pretty well, especially as it's not two towards the middle, so you could potentially put a brick wall along here and kind of just play off that. And if you can hide your hull, yeah, you will be pretty strong. But yeah, this thing's hull is pretty weak frontally. It can pen itself 50-50, lower plate 100% of the time. And interestingly, it does look like if you're quite a tall tank, you will be able to shoot down and overmatch its kind of engine deck style area, which is always interesting, especially if you're face hugging and you're like this and you can't shoot here. You can just shoot down into its hull or overmatch here, which is always interesting. But how does it stack up versus gold on flat ground? Well, basically the entire upper hull becomes an auto pen unless you low roll a lot in terms of pen, which is pretty weak. But its turret remains pretty strong, with it being about a 40% chance to pen on flat ground, and that's if you hit especially straight around the gun. So basically it's direct cheeks, because it does have that little bit of an angular kind of turret face, and the cupola basically doesn't get any bigger. You can pen a little bit lower on the cupola, but basically the cupola doesn't change. But this thing, as I said, does have 8 degrees of gun depression, so that does spice it up a little bit. And as you can see, when it's using its gun depression to its maximum, the cupola becomes pretty small. You know, it's still visible and will still be hittable, especially if you're semi-close, mid to short range. But its turret becomes a lot stronger. The only thing at this point that's really going to be buttering through that turret is going to be high pen heat. From tanks such as 121B, STB-1, you know, we're talking 340 heat here. That will begin to start to butter this turret, but against other tier 9, and remember this is a tier 9 tank, so it can face tier 7s. Tier 7s, they ain't penning this. Tier 8s, they ain't penning this. Tier 9s, only very few tanks are going to be penning this. There does look to be a small shot trap kind of area underneath the gun, but it's very small, so not reliable at all. But this thing, when it's using its gun depression, yeah, its upper hull becomes very nice, its turret becomes very nice, and even against, you know, this is what it's going to look like if you're playing a tier 8 tank and firing gold. Yeah, you're hitting that cupola or you're not penning. So, pretty strong in a hull down kind of situation, which is a little bit not stereotypical, I guess, of German heavies. Normally they are, you know, you have a flat turret face to pen, but this one, with it being slightly, as we'll look in the visual, you see it's slightly angular, kind of curves around. Like here you go, you can kind of see not particularly flat, and how it angles up. Yeah, that just works in your favor when you're using this tank's gun depression. And generally, I think this is a really good looking tank, actually. As I said, it's a bit of a Frankenstein, almost combining multiple different types of German tanks into one, and I kind of like it. I think it looks really good. So props to the design department, because it looks good, and I think this tank will be pretty decent. Is it going to be overpowered? No. Is it going to be good? Yes. It's going to be kind of those tanks which are kind of fall into the band of being, if you have it, it will perform. It will potentially struggle in tier 10 games because, you know, look, you can't particularly side scrape with it, because this will just become pennable. You know, when we're firing gold, it can't really side scrape. So, yeah, you've got a shot trap, so the track is pennable. This is pennable. Your cupola's pennable. You can maybe, you know, bait some shots. So, it is going to struggle in tier 10 games. That's just the general basis of having a tier 9 heavy. But in tier 8 games, in tier 9 games, this tank will be pretty strong. It will perform. And if you're good at playing heavy tanks, you will be able to mitigate this tank's cupola and weak hull. That's going to be kind of how you have to play this tank. But yeah, hopefully we do see this tank soon. It is rumoured to be coming in the Halloween Waffentrager loot crates, loot boxes. Would I recommend gambling for this tank? Well, if you have every single other tank in the loot boxes that are available, yeah, it's not terrible. You can normally spend about, what, 35 quid, 40 euros, and be guaranteed to pick up. Normally we get 2 new tanks in the loot crates for the Waffenträger. This is looking like one of them. Yeah, then it's probably worth it. So if you were to spend, what, 80 euros, you can pick yourself up 2 new heavies. Normally heavy tanks are valued at about 40 to 45 Great British pounds, so that's what, 50 to 55 euros roughly, give or take. So I've been able to pick them up for 80 instead of like 90 to 100 is slightly cheaper, and obviously you do get the other stuff as well. But yeah, this tank's looking decent, and I'll be interested to see how it does perform when it hits the random queue. So if you did enjoy this video, do let me know down in the comments what you think about this tank. I would love to know your opinions. And yeah, subscribe, like, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!